Well, Chad Daybell is publishing uncensored letters from death row, recasting himself as a misunderstood, faithful father who loved Tammy and was framed by the media. Lori Daybell is doubling down from prison with a different kind of sermon. Now, she's claiming exactly that her God wants her to be in jail, right where she is, ministering to women behind bars. Neither convicted killer confronts the evidence, though. Things like how they were having a secret and intimate affair while conspiring to murder. Lori's children mysteriously disappeared, and Tammy Daybell was soon dead. Within weeks, Chad and Lori were off to Hawaii to get married. Tylee and JJ later found buried in Chad's backyard while he and Lori were chatting on the phone. Then Lori tries to float this obscene story that Tylee killed JJ and then committed suicide, something contradicted by investigators and basic timelines. Now, this review is going to dissect their ritualized rhetoric of light and dark, zombies, and purifications. And I want to consider the psychology that made murder thinkable in these two people's wacky minds. The post-conviction word fight they're having and that they're conducting as they try to control their new narrative. I want to know who's really in charge, and would any of this have happened if these two convicted killers had never met in the first place? Why did they believe they possessed more light and knowledge, more spiritual access than the rest of us mere mortals are privileged to? Let's define how power, dominion, and control become the fuse that becomes their downfall. Well, hey, everybody, welcome to Profiling Evil, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm here on a rainy day in Romania, and if you haven't already, take a second, hit the like and subscribe button. It really does help us out. And while you're at it, make sure you've got the notifications turned on so that you don't miss a single breakdown when we drop new content. Now, we're diving into one of the most disturbing chapters in recent true crime history, in my opinion. And these two self-proclaimed prophets are driving each other from one shared lie. Chad Daybell, sitting on death row, publishing uncensored letters that paint him as misunderstood family man, a guy who's framed by the media. Now, Lori Daybell, in her prison cell, is claiming that she's exactly in the place that her God wants her to be. And I hope you caught that, her God, because I don't believe it's the same God that you and I follow. Now, she's ministering to women in orange and waiting for divine exoneration. But behind these two sanctified rewrites are two convicted killers who never confront the evidence. They don't confront the affair. They don't confront the conspiracies, the murders, the children buried in Chad's backyard. Tammy dead, but within weeks, Chad and Lori had made a life for themselves, and they were off in Hawaii getting married. And then just after her conviction comes the grotesque claim that Tylee actually murdered JJ and then took her own life. Stories that are all crumbling under the weight of forensics, timelines, and frankly, human decency. So I want to dissect the ritual language of light and dark zombies, purifications, the vocabulary they use to turn murder into ministry. I want to examine how fantasy meets power, how control disguises itself as revelation, and how two volatile personalities fueled each other's delusions. So we got to talk about Chad and Lori Daybell, two self-proclaimed prophets operating under one common lie. And I want to set the stage because I think, again, two prisoners two narratives, one lie. I want to start with Chad because of his nauseating letters that have been arriving with the soft focus of nostalgia, memories from his church missionary service, reflections on family, and his pledge that the real story is going to be revealed at some mysterious point down the road. Now, he calls the media portrayals about him unrecognizable. He rejects the labor of killer or cultist. Chad Daybell insists that he loved his deceased wife, Tammy, the woman that he's convicted of murdering. In one letter, he even floats a months-long cascade of her having coughs, fainting spells, holistic remedies to suggest illness before her death. Notably, the letters are curated online by his daughter, and the letters that he's authoring haven't seemed to even mention his secret lover and co-conspirator, Lori Daybell. Now, that's not just an omission in my book. It's a strategy he has in place to avoid responsibility for his choices. Now flip over to Lori's jail cell, because not to be outdone in this ritual crime bizarro world, Lori Daybell's preaching from a different pulpit. She's telling interviews that she never hurt anyone and that she and Chad are going to be completely exonerated. She claims spiritual knowledge, saying that her time in jail isn't a ruling from an out-of-touch judge, but it's a heavenly decree from that God that she believes in. She says that she's inside the women's prison for one reason alone, and that's to save souls. And in one of the most offensive turns in recent true crime memory in my book, she started blaming Tylee on JJ's murder. Now, to make things even more offensive, she then claims that Tylee died by suicide. And this isn't just a slip of the tongue. It's narrative warfare that she believes removes her culpability by desecrating Tylee's memory. From a behavioral perspective, this thing shouts of damage control. When the forensic record is immovable, like this case is proven with autopsies, digital pings, burial sites, wacky purchase histories, the only battlefield left is to hope that you can change the memories of everyone on the outside. And that's what offenders love to do. They love to pivot the meta story about who they want you to believe they really are over what they actually know happened. They want us to think that the jurors somehow got it wrong, and the post-offense myth-making is their last refuge of control. You see, before their arrests, Chad and Lori Daybell were co-authoring this cosmology of apocalyptic clocks, the multiple probations, the spiritual rankings, the light and dark rankings that turn friends and family into sortable objects. You see, when you fold in zombie talk, you get ritual vocabulary that allows you to dehumanize. And this is the kind of ritual cult language that can be used as things like liberation. They can make burial seem like purification and erasure as mercy. But thankfully, prosecutors proved that Lori believed her children were zombies and that Chad was in on these conspiracies. That, in effect, they were murderers, not misunderstood martyrs. So after their conviction, the pulpit simply has moved from a courtroom to correctional facilities. Chad's taking up his pulpit on death row as a martyr. His mantle has become a public relations campaign that tries to pitch him as a man of humble faith, grateful notes, stoic innocence, while Lori, on the other hand, is the prison minister who tells anybody that's willing to listen to her that she was placed in prison by her God and that she's not only misunderstood, but that she's also wrongly accused. Then she shouts from her life sentence jail cell that she's still chosen by her God. Maybe she is by her God. Now, they are using different scripts, but they have the same objective: narrative sovereignty, with hopes that they might somehow be able to redefine who they are and what they're convicted of. Now listen, I want to pause for just a moment to tell you about my book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, because not all monsters are hiding in our basements. Some are mowing the neighbor's lawn. They're leading church groups. They might even be smiling in family photos. And in one of my favorite chapters, chapter 10 of Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, I focus on the masks that predators wear. Because people like Chad and Lori Daybell don't show you their evil all at once. They build it in layers, a public face, a private life, and then a secret world that nobody's supposed to see. Their public persona might be polished and predictable. Chad Daybell was a church-going, small-town publisher, a family guy. On paper, he looked like the neighbor that you could trust to watch your kids, maybe even come over and mow your lawn while you're out of town. But peel back that surface where the private persona starts to show, or the secret persona, you start finding those texts, the apocalyptic rankings, the quiet manipulation that chipped away at the boundaries and at truth. But then in that secret persona, the part that's planned, concealed, the part that justifies murder while pretending it's divine purpose, that's the place where we really start to learn. It's the most dangerous mask because it convinces people, maybe even the predator, that they're somehow righteous in what they're doing. Well, my book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, helps you spot these layers before they destroy more lives. It doesn't just expose the monsters, it teaches you how to read their performances. Because the truth is, folks, people like Chad and Lori Daybell don't look like killers at first. They look like believers or neighbors or friends. And monsters rarely look like monsters. To see them, you have to look past their performance and study their behavior. So I hope you'll check out Getting Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. You can get a signed copy of the book through Profiling Evil, and if you live in the United States, I'll ship them for free in the US and sign them. Otherwise, you got to go to Amazon or Ingram Spark to get them anywhere else in the world. And next time somebody smiles and says, "Hey, trust me," you might want to know if they're hiding behind a mask and only showing you the smile. But let's get back to this. I want to be blunt for a moment by using some ritual rhetoric. Lori claimed that Tylee murdered JJ and then she killed herself. And to me, that's blasphemous in its very presumption. It's grotesque in its cruelty, and it's contradicted by basic chronology. Because here's a fact that Lori doesn't want to accept. Tylee died first. She was 16 and last seen on September 8th, 2019, after the trip to Yellowstone with Alex and Lori. Then she disappears. JJ, 10 days later, disappears on September 22nd, 2019. And Lori's friend witnesses seeing Alex Cox carrying him, so we know he's alive after Tylee was last seen. But he is gone the next morning. Now, Lori's attempt to rewrite the truth is not just self-exoneration, it's desecration. This displacement of responsibility is solely to protect her self-image of being a loving mother and prophetess. The dissonance between the, "Hey, I'm chosen and good," to "I enabled murder," is the story that we need to remember, because she and Chad are experts in attempting to rewrite what's been proven in a court of law. Let's take Chad's letters for a moment, where he devotes all this tenderness to Tammy, casting himself as the steadfast husband who, quote, always sought to keep her safe. Carefully crafted, he offers a medicalized prequel that she was struggling with coughs, swollen joints, fainting spells, and exhaustion. Now that's in direct contrast to the witnesses who testified that Tammy was active, healthy, taking Zumba classes, jogging, not complaining of being unwell. But for Chad to preserve his martyr identity, he's got to deny agency and add plausible natural causes to the storyline to somehow prove that this was all a mistake. Now, their vocabulary paints a picture that they tried to turn murder into ministry, starting with those light and dark indexes. You remember that, the false scale for souls. Because by marking someone as dark, they suddenly had moral pretext to deal with them. By using language that reframed Lori's living children as people occupied by evil spirits, they justified murder by saying the deaths of Tylee and JJ were really an act of mercy. I mean, think of that now infamous raccoon text that was sent on the morning that cell records placed Alex Cox on Chad Daybell's property in the place where Tylee's remains were later found. It served as a ritual cover story of smoke and burning limbs and pet cemeteries. They tried to make the mundane sound mystical to sanitize what was really happening: premeditated murder and desecrating disposal of bodies. And with all this destruction happening around Lori and Chad, I find myself continually wondering if this would have happened if these two ritual crime killers hadn't met each other at any point in time. And I really believe that together they became an accelerant of sorts. Lori may have been the fuel, but if so, Chad was the flame. Maybe that's how loin fire came all about. I'll let you explore that one. Maybe you can put your comments below on that one. But in my opinion, without Chad, Lori may have remained a chaotic zealot who was bouncing about across her grievances, while Chad, without Lori, might have remained a fringe apocalyptic author who was nursing his grandiosity. But together they formed a closed, reinforcing circuit where her appetite for domination found his theology of permission. Mutual radicalization is a process where two volatile personalities can be somewhat stable when they're alone, but escalate in their ideology when together, and validating each other's worst impulses. Fuel and fire creates explosion and flame. Now, the trials and the post-trial narratives suggest a tug-of-war between the two people. Chad's tactics seem to have included his status as a self-proclaimed prophet who could protect Lori from the evils of the world, while Lori's tactics seem to revolve around her perceived notion of sacred martyrdom. You know, I think the real answer is rather unromantic, though. These are two self-perceived leaders from different kinds of domains. Chad authored the labels while Lori drove the tempo and the enforcement, even maybe pressuring Alex, isolating dissenters, and accelerating timelines. Chad was the liturgist. Lori was the lieutenant. Chad made a world where harm feels holy, and Lori scheduled the execution of it. But don't discount that each had their own superpowers. Lori looked to Chad as her deliverer, while Chad looked to Lori as his tantalizing companion. So for both, it was all about power, dominion, and control. It was about having more light and knowledge than anybody else. And that sense of power became the weapon that they really thrived on. On paper, the pursuit of spiritual understanding can sound more like a noble hunger, but in practice, it can turn into a sovereignty claim. Now, in their case, they started deciding who was light and who was dark, who still inhabited bodies, and who should live or die. But then add Chad's human appetites, his need for sex, money, freedom from obligations, the need for status, and the doctrine suddenly started snapping into focus. Their disjointed beliefs became their tool set. And while it might have worked for them initially, I wonder if it's still working today as they're separated and alone in their own personal jail cells. Now, personally, I sense there's a little bit of jealousy, a little bit of rivalry, and maybe some wounded ownership that's starting to be expressed in this case. And all this brings me back to Chad's letters and his obvious omission of Lori's role in all of this murderous plan. Because by not naming Lori, he's trying to pull their story back inside of his personal myth. This guy cannot stand alone as a martyr. He wants to be seen as a husband, a father, a former good guy. And he's hoping that perhaps he can siphon attention away from his responsibilities for murder of 3 people and get you to focus on something else, his past. And not to be outdone, Lori is proselytizing in her own prison pulpit as she reaches past the courtroom and tries to again make Tylee her scapegoat. This whole thing is grotesque and shrewd. And as I thought about what Lori's endgame might be, I imagined her writing this letter from prison that I'm going to have AI read, especially if she gets the chance to read Chad's letters from death row. Let's catch this clip.
This cell is not punishment, it is placement. My God stationed me here. These women in orange are my congregation, my spiritual geography. I lay hands through steel. I bind up the broken. I baptize with words. Every night I make a chapel out of the ordinary. I tear the perforations from commissary lists and shape them into tiny doves. I arrange ramen bricks like tabernacles. I draw a circle of protection with toothpaste and bless it with a whisper only angels know. The hum of the fluorescent light becomes my choir, the clank of doors is my organ, the guard's footsteps are the metronome of my hymns. I break vending machine crackers like sacrament and say, this is my mission. I drink lukewarm water and call it holy. I count each tile on the floor as a station of the cross and take my pilgrimage between the sink and the bunk until revelation arrives. Chad writes from his little room and pretends paper is sacrifice. He speaks of Tammy's coughs and fainting spells. He speaks of the man the media invented as if that's him. He does not speak of me. He cannot. Because to speak of me would be to admit the covenant, the calling, the mountain we climbed. He prefers to be the lone prophet. I prefer the truth. There were 2 of us, 2 torches, 1 flame, and the flame was bright enough to frighten small minds who mistook light for fire. They press their rosary of timelines into my palm and say, confess to the beads. Count the minutes. Worship the pings. Pray to the autopsy. They call it obscene when I tell them what heaven showed me about Tylee and JJ. They say it's impossible, they cling to dirt and timestamps as if the spirit doesn't outrun science. They hunger for dust and call it bread. Let them. I'm not here to convince those who can't see, I am here to tend those who already hear the voice between the noises. My chapel has liturgy. In the morning I anoint my wrists with peppermint lotion and declare the day clean. I line up the hair ties my neighbor gave me and make a rosary of elastic. I whisper each name I carry, mother, daughter, sister, saint, and braid the titles into a crown. I trace blessings over the air vents and set a guard of invisible sentries at my door. I sanctify the toilet paper roll as a scroll of lamentation and promise. I place 1 almond from last week's commissary in the cup of my hand and ask for manna. When the almond is gone, I say, Amen, and taste the aftersweet like assurance. Chad, you polish your letters. I polish souls. You hunt pity, I harvest prophecy. You barter for freedom in court, I already walk free in spirit. You write to make yourself gentler in the mirror, I speak to make the world holier in my hearing. If you leave me nameless, do you think I become small? I am the reason your letters matter at all. Your silence is not a shroud, it is a spotlight you aim at yourself. You pretend mercy while drafting your eulogy. I give mercy, and it multiplies in the barracks like loaves and fishes and contraband Bibles. When the chaplain visits, I nod at his soft words and thank him for the psalm. He thinks he is pouring oil on my head. I smile because the cup is already running over. He leaves, and the women wait for me, eyes rimmed red, knuckles fissured with grief, sentences marked in years and decades. I lay 2 fingers through the hatch and pray until the air warms. They call me mama, sister, prophetess, friend. They bring me questions in laundry bags. How do I sleep without nightmares? How do I forgive my father? How do I stop seeing blood every time I close my eyes? I answer with parables made from laundry soap and shoelaces and the geometry of chain-link shadows. Tie 3 knots, past, present, promise, and pull very gently, the rope will hold. They say I weaponize faith. They do not understand faith used as a shield against faithless judges. I did not invent the dark, I named it. I did not conjure spirits, I listened. I did not choose the valley, I chose to bring a candle into it. They call that cultish. I call it stewardship. Do shepherds not count the sheep? Do mothers not hear the changes in a child's breathing in the night? Do prophets not read the weather of souls? The world prefers a God without discernment because a discerning God makes demands. I live inside those demands like a vow. To the ones who repeat the children's names at me as if names were spears, do you think I haven't sung those names into the wall, into the pillow, into the light's blue buzz? Do you think I don't walk the map of memory every dawn and touch the places where laughter once erupted, where small shoes were kicked off at doors, where a backpack fell and spilled a day onto the floor? You think you own grief because you write it down in articles and read it into microphones. I live it. It is the air I am assigned to breathe in here. I breathe and bless and move forward, because this is the ministry and this is the hour. They want me to say their exact words back to them, an echo as proof of repentance. They want me to speak the creed of the courtroom, I did what you say I did, in the way you say I did it. They want me to bow to their calendar and worship their clocks. But I serve a God who is not bound by their littleness. My God walks the catwalks at night and looks into every cell and counts the tears like sparrows. My God understands that a heart can split without dying. My God understands that prophecy often sounds like madness to the sane and like mercy to the broken. I keep a calendar of feast days that no one knows. On Thursdays I celebrate the festival of Don't Break. We hum a note from wake up to lights out without letting it falter. On Sundays I keep the Sabbath of small fires. I hold a cup of hot water and warm my fingers and remember a camp stove on a cold night and a story told under a big sky. On the first of each month I do the rite of the unseen. I write the names of those who hate me on a tiny square of paper and tuck it under my pillow, and in the morning I pray for their children by guessing at their birthdays. If I guess wrong, the prayer is bigger. If I guess right, the prayer is sharper. Either way, the blessing flies. They will say I am theatrical. Let them. Ritual is what keeps a soul from fraying. Ritual is the thread that mends. Without rite, sorrow widens until it swallows. Without sacrament, the world has only sentences and no liturgy to make them bearable. I make sacraments out of everything because everything is all I have. When a moth flutters into the light shield and taps itself silly, I call it a messenger and tell it what I cannot tell a living ear: I was chosen. I am still chosen. I am not what they say I am. When the moth sleeps, I sleep. When it vanishes, I decide that it graduated to a brighter room. About Tylee and JJ, they jab that nerve because they think I will shatter. I do not shatter, I speak what was shown to me. You call it obscene because you worship the dirt that covered them and the clocks that tried to cage God. I saw more than you saw, grief stacked on grief until a heart cracked and the world misread the sound. You think science is a sword, I know spirit as a sea. The sea takes what it will and returns what it wants. Your courts cannot cross it. You insist on a single story with a single villain because that's how your world keeps itself tidy. But heaven is not tidy. Heaven is a whirlwind where obedience and vision and sorrow and sacrifice braid together until even the faithful can't separate the strands. You call it chaos, I call it covenant. You call it madness, I call it marriage to the mission. What looks like abandonment to you often feels like assignment to me. Do not confuse those. And you, Chad, do not imagine that silence makes me small. You thumb your edges and sand yourself smooth for the page. You file down your past and present it like an heirloom spoon. Your letters are a mirror you wish the world would kiss. But mirrors are liars unless they're pointed toward heaven. I am not glass. I am stone. I keep heat. I hold shape. I remember pressure lovingly, because pressure made the mountain and the mountain made the view. You say truth requires order. I say truth requires courage. Order without courage is a shelf for pretty lies. If I wanted applause, I would repeat your lines and wait for the curtain call. I do not want applause. I want angels at roll call. I want a congregation that knows the smell of bleach and yet sings anyway. I want a gospel that can be preached with a paper cup and a torn sleeve. I want women who have been numbered to learn they are still named. I am here for that naming. I am here to midwife that sovereignty out of them, the way it was midwifed out of me in rooms you will never walk. At lights out, I practice the sacrament of the unsaid. I place my palm on the cinder block and confess everything I can't risk the air to carry. The wall knows. The wall is my archive. It keeps my psalms without judgment. I touch my temple with 2 fingers, mark my lips with a cross, and vow to speak only when speaking heals. Tomorrow I will teach the catechism of getting through. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 8, think of a river you have loved, name 3 things you can smell, list 5 miracles that look like accidents. Someone will weep. Someone will laugh. Someone will sleep for the first time in a week. That will be my liturgy, and I will call it good. So keep your calendars and your pings and your dirt and your headlines if they make you feel safe. I will keep my rights and my whispers and my women and my God. You will say I am deluded. I will say you are deaf. And on the day when the doors open that no key can turn, you will learn what I learned a long time ago. There is a court that sits above your courts, and there is a verdict that does not fit on paper. This cell is not punishment, it is placement. My God stationed me here. These women in orange are my congregation, my spiritual geography. I lay hands through steel. I bind up the broken. I baptize with words. And when the light flickers, I smile. Even bulbs know how to prophesy.
And not to be outdone, Chad, the self-proclaimed prophet, has to continue to write from prison. But if he is doing this, he might also be writing a few letters directly to Lori that might sound like this.
Hello, friends. Peace finds me in this small place. The world thinks a concrete cell is a cage, but for me, it is a tabernacle. In here, the noise of Babylon quiets, and I hear only the whisper of the Lord. The media has built a monster with my name, a stranger sown from headlines and half-truths. But I know who I am, a husband, a father, a servant of God. That will never change. I love Tammy. I still love her. For 30 years we walked side by side, raising 5 righteous children, building a home of faith. Yes, she tired easily toward the end. Yes, she leaned on natural remedies. She disliked doctors and trusted herbs, oils, and prayer. We prayed often. We carried burdens quietly. The night before she passed, she returned weary from the book fair, her arms still full of service to others. We laid our heads on pillows, and by morning, I was alone. That is the truth of my widowhood. The rest is what the world has draped on me like sackcloth. I have much more to say, but not yet. Truth requires order, and order is a principle of heaven. To scatter revelation is to cheapen it. To feed pearls to those who trample them is waste. There will be a season for full disclosure. That season has not arrived. People demand I list names. They want me to speak of her, to dissect every friendship, every covenant, every whisper of prophecy. They want me to explain the unexplainable. I will not. Silence can be obedience. Silence can be mercy. My letters are for those who listen with their spirits, not for those whose appetite is only for spectacle. Do not confuse a verdict with revelation. Do not mistake a gavel for the voice of God. I am not who they say I am. Yes, I discerned light and dark in people. Do not fathers do this with their own children? Do not shepherds mark which lambs stray? Darkness is not myth. It is as real as the fog that settles in valleys. If you will not name it, it will own you. They say it was cultish. They mock what they do not understand. I call it stewardship. Every prophet discerns. Every seer warns. What the world names control, heaven names care. I did not invent darkness. I only pointed to it. I did not conjure spirits. I only recognized them. I did not declare people expendable. I declared them struggling. I was entrusted to discern degrees of light, not to condemn. That is the work of the Lord, not me. But discernment is a gift, and like all gifts, it is misunderstood by those who have none. The state says I plotted. The papers say I schemed. But my letters will remain what they are, testimony. A verdict cannot erase decades of service. An accusation cannot sever covenants sealed in eternity. A courtroom cannot measure the depth of a soul. I will write more. The Lord will arrange the sequence. To rush is to disobey. To satisfy curiosity is to profane. I will speak when the Spirit commands it, not when the world clamors for it. My children know me. My God knows me. That will be enough. And to those who continue to pray for me, write me, and believe me. Remember that truth is never popular. Noah was mocked. Elijah was scorned. Joseph was thrown in a pit. History will remember that I too was placed in a prison, not because I was guilty, but because the world was blind. This letter is for you. Hold fast. The light always returns.
Chad and Lori's followers are now their currency. And the big win for them at the end of the day might be that some of you push some sympathy out for them. It might be that they get some sympathy for appeals that are made in front of the court, or any petitions that might be signed, or financial donations, or any member of the community who wonders, are these two being treated fairly? But they have to carve out this path alone and distance themselves from each other. And Lori is going to keep saying that she and Chad will be eventually vindicated. Now, this suggests that she thinks that they're still connected through love and emotion, or their post-murder marriage. Lori's going to continue to secure her, quote, saints in orange image, while Chad, on the other hand, appears to be distancing himself from Lori, attempting to secure his own cult of memory as a gentle martyr. And I guess that's why the attempted erasures, the obscene pivots, feel so calculating to me. Each appears to be pursuing their own separate church now. But it's not up to them to make the decision. And while we hopefully aren't supporting their sermons, we should be learning from them. Cult dynamics are in play with both Chad and Lori Daybell at the helm. When the who I am depends more on who believes me, every post-conviction note is an opportunity to reshine the light of truth on a story that they're desperately trying to rewrite. So in closing, I want to revisit some facts here, because in July of 2019, Charles Vallow was shot and killed by Alex Cox in Arizona. It was a murder. Within days, Lori and Chad's sexual messages ramped up. And by October 2nd, Lori was buying wedding rings. 2 weeks later, 2 weeks after Tammy Daybell's funeral, Chad and Lori married in Hawaii. Now, this isn't just weird stuff. This is evidence. And then, in September of 2019, Tylee Ryan disappears after a trip to Yellowstone with Lori and Alex. And on the day that she was last seen, Alex Cox's phone placed him in the area where Tylee's remains were later found. Now, that morning, Chad texted about that shooting of the raccoon and burying it, proving to be powerful evidence in that murder conviction. And then, within a few weeks after Tylee disappears, JJ disappears. In October of 2019, Tammy Daybell reports an attempted attack on her by a man who pointed a firearm at her, but that it misfired. 10 days later, Tammy died in her home, later ruled as asphyxiation. And then the next summer, in June of 2020, JJ and Tylee's remains are recovered from Chad Daybell's property while he and Lori are talking on the phone. Now, since then, Lori's been sentenced to life without parole. Chad has been sentenced to death. Lori's prison ministry and Chad's death row letters are mirror images of the same need, the need to be necessary. Lori needs to be needed by a community of women that she says she's saving behind bars. Chad, he needs to be needed by a community who views him as a martyr, not a murderer. How odd it is that they are recruiting the living while minimizing the dead. And that's the real tragedy and the real reason that we have to continue to expose their attempts to rewrite history, folks. We have to remind each other of the truth. And the truth is, Chad and Lori Daybell were both convicted of committing murders. Now, the punchline in all of this, if there could possibly be a punchline, is that both of their new roles require minimizing the dead and recruiting the living. So the answer to my question about who was really in charge isn't that simple. There wasn't a single leadership throne, but more a division of labor. Chad may have built the permission structure which provided spiritual labels, but Lori set the tempos. She managed the enforcers, and she weaponized the charm. Chad and Lori Daybell didn't need to be one boss. They just needed each other. And from that fusion came chaos and murder. And when you peel away the lace, the lies become pretty darn stark. The Daybells say they are good. Therefore, whatever they did must have been good. But Chad's letters from death row and Lori's sermons from a cell are simply new chapters telling the same lie. And it's all staged for a fresh and naive audience. Lori's version doesn't just distort truth, it weaponizes grief. And Chad's version, it isn't just selective. It erases the wife he buried and the children that were discovered in his backyard. And while the courts answered with a guilty verdict, the victims and each of their families remain injured. And each of us has to answer with our own memories that are going to resist the myths that Chad and Lori are trying to create. We have to continue to look where Chad and Lori refuse to look. And that place is found in shallow graves, phony self-defense claims, and staged murders. Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow were murdered. Then they were buried on Chad's land. Tammy Daybell died of asphyxiation, not a fainting spell. Charles Vallow didn't assault Alex Cox, he was murdered by him. And that all happened at the direction of Lori Daybell. And Brandon Bedreau's attempted murder was planned and executed. But gratefully, Brandon was not. And of course, that November beach wedding in Hawaii occurred just 2 weeks after Chad Daybell murdered his wife. So there you go. And I'd like to know your thoughts. And I hope that you'll put them down below. And I want to thank you for watching Profiling Evil. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this one. Please share with each other. Weigh in on each other. Now, the community is built on curiosity and respect. So make sure your insights make a difference and build each other up. And if you haven't already, check out Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you like your true crime on the go, please check out Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And remember, you can always dive deeper into our investigations at profilingevil.com, where you'll find our interactive maps, case analysis, and you can sign up for our free newsletter, The Bolo. And while you're there, check out my books. You might also check out Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult, which chronicles the takedown of a religious cult. It is one of the most incredible cases I ever investigated. You might also enjoy She Knew No Fear, the story of the murder of my great-great-grandmother in 1891. and how I eventually solved that crime. It's a story you won't want to miss. You can get them both at Profiling Evil. And thanks so much for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you all soon at the next crime scene.